Vina's hands trembled as she read the diplomatic announcement for the third time. The holographic text floating before her remained unchanged, its gentle blue glow illuminating her silvery skin in the dim chamber of the Celestial Council's communication hub. In accordance with the Earth-Celestian Peace Treaty, you, Vina Delarion, have been selected for the Diplomatic Union Program. Your intended mate, Lieutenant Thomas Kane of the Earth Defense Force. She collapsed into her chair, her luminescent markings flickering with anxiety. The delicate patterns that traced her arms and face, a source of pride among her people, now pulsed with an erratic rhythm that betrayed her inner turmoil. Your genetic compatibility is exceptional, the message continued. The union will serve as a symbol of lasting peace between our species. Peace. The word seemed to mock her. How could there be peace with a species whose history was written in blood? Vina had spent the last 3 cycles studying Earth's history, each new discovery adding to her mounting horror. Wars that spanned entire continents, weapons that could destroy cities in seconds, hand-to-hand combat sports for entertainment, the humans seemed to revel in violence. Ambassador Delarion. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. Her assistant, Rin, stood in the doorway, his own markings glowing with concern. The council awaits your response. Vina straightened her posture, willing her markings to stabilize. As a member of one of Celestia's most prominent diplomatic families, she had been trained since childhood to maintain composure in any situation. But this was beyond anything she had prepared for. Tell them I accept, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As if she had any choice. The treaty was too important, the peace too fragile to risk offense by refusing. Rin nodded and disappeared, leaving Vina alone with her thoughts and the database terminal. Her fingers moved across the holographic interface, pulling up every scrap of information about Lieutenant Thomas Kane that she could access. His military record was impressive, or terrifying, depending on one's perspective. Top of his class in combat training, multiple commendations for leadership in crisis situations, expertise in various Earth weapons. The image accompanying his file showed a tall, muscular human with dark hair and what her cultural training identified as a serious expression. He looked exactly like the sort of warrior that haunted Celestian cautionary tales. He's a diplomatic officer now, Vina reminded herself aloud, her voice echoing in the empty chamber. Surely they wouldn't choose someone dangerous for this program. But the stories she'd heard about humans lingered in her mind. Their unpredictable emotions, their capacity for sudden violence, their strange pleasure in physical confrontation. Even their mating customs seemed aggressive to Celestian sensibilities, all that physical contact, those passionate displays of affection. Vina spent the next several hours immersing herself in human cultural studies, desperate to understand what awaited her. She learned about their concept of romance, so different from the careful, formal courtships of her people. Humans seemed to embrace chaos in matters of the heart, letting emotions guide them rather than logic and diplomatic necessity. As the first of Celestia's 3 suns began to set, casting a purple glow through the chamber's crystalline windows, Vina received another message. This one was from Lieutenant Kane himself. Greetings, Ambassador Delarion, it began formally. I look forward to meeting you and working together to strengthen the bonds between our peoples. I understand you may have concerns about human customs and behaviors. Please feel free to ask any questions that might help ease your transition to Earth. The message was perfectly polite, diplomatically phrased, and somehow that made it worse. What violent impulses lurked beneath that careful courtesy? What primitive instincts did he struggle to contain? Vina's research had revealed that humans were descendants of predator species, creatures that hunted and killed for survival. Unlike her own people, who had evolved from photosynthetic beings that drew energy directly from their triple suns, humans had clawed their way up from savage origins. How much of that ancient predator remained in their genetic memory? She began composing her response, then deleted it. Started again, deleted again. How did one address a future mate who might be capable of terrible violence? In Celestian culture, even raising one's voice was considered a serious breach of etiquette. Finally, she managed a brief, formal reply, "Greetings, Lieutenant Kane. I appreciate your welcome and look forward to our meeting. May our union serve the greater peace." As she prepared for her rest cycle, Vina caught a glimpse of herself in the chamber's reflective walls. Her markings had settled into a dull, anxious pulse, and her usually bright eyes had darkened with worry. In 2 weeks, she would board a ship bound for Earth. In 2 weeks, she would have to face this human warrior who was to be her mate. For peace, she whispered to her reflection, trying to draw strength from the diplomatic training of her youth. For the future of both our peoples. But as she settled onto her resting platform, her markings dimmed to match the darkness around her, Vina couldn't help but wonder if she was preparing for a diplomatic triumph, or walking willingly into a predator's den. The dreams that came during her rest cycle were filled with images from Earth's history, armies clashing on battlefields, the explosion of atomic weapons, the roar of combat sports crowds. And through it all, the serious face of Lieutenant Thomas Kane, watching her with those strange, predatory human eyes. The Earth vessel, Stellar Bridge, was nothing like the elegant crystalline ships of the Celestian fleet. Its utilitarian metal corridors and practical design spoke of a species that valued function over form, and Vina found herself counting the days until their arrival on Earth with increasing anxiety. She had been aboard for 12 Earth days now, and despite her initial determination to remain in her quarters, the ship's captain had politely but firmly insisted that she participate in crew activities. "Cultural exchange is a two-way street, Ambassador," Captain Rebecca Walsh had said with what Vina had learned was called a smile. Today's cultural exchange was taking place in the ship's recreation area, where Vina sat stiffly at a table, watching humans engage in various leisure activities. A group played something called basketball on a small court, their movements quick and aggressive. Others lifted weights, a concept that still baffled her. Why would anyone deliberately strain their muscles for no practical purpose? "Would you like to try the smoothie?" asked Lieutenant Diane Foster, the ship's cultural liaison. She pushed a brightly colored drink across the table. "It's made with real fruit from Earth." Vina's markings flickered with uncertainty, but she reached for the drink. Over the past days, she had learned that refusing human offerings of food or drink was considered impolite. The sweet, cold liquid surprised her with its pleasant taste, and her markings brightened involuntarily. "You're glowing," Diane observed. "That means you're happy, right?" "Yes," Vina admitted, then hastily added, "it's an involuntary response. We cannot always control our bioluminescence." "Like blushing for humans," Diane nodded. "Hey, speaking of human responses, you received another message from Lieutenant Kane. Would you like me to show you how to access the video communication system? He's requested a live chat before you reach Earth." Vina's markings dimmed immediately. She had been exchanging text messages with her future mate, each one formal and carefully worded. The idea of seeing him move, hearing his voice, it made her anxiety spike. Perhaps tomorrow," she said diplomatically. Diane's expression showed what Vina had learned to recognize as sympathy. "He's not what you're expecting, you know. Tom, Lieutenant Kane, he's one of the gentlest people I know." "Gentle?" Vina couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. "But his military record. Being good at something doesn't mean you enjoy using those skills," Diane said quietly. "Tom joined the Defense Force to protect people, not to hurt them. Did you know he maintains the largest botanical garden in the military compound?" This new information didn't fit with Vina's image of the warrior she'd been dreading. Before she could respond, a commotion from the basketball court drew their attention. 2 players had collided and fallen. Vina tensed, expecting violence to erupt. Instead, both humans laughed, helped each other up, and continued their game. "See?" Diane gestured toward the court. "Contact doesn't always mean combat for us." Over the next few days, Vina found herself observing the crew more closely. She noticed things she had missed before, the gentle way the medical officer handled his instruments, the careful precision of the engineering team, the joy in the mess hall during shared meals. These humans were capable of violence, yes, but they chose cooperation, friendship, and peace. Finally, 6 days before their scheduled arrival on Earth, Vina agreed to a video call with Lieutenant Kane. She spent hours preparing, her markings refusing to settle into a calm pattern. When his image appeared on the screen, she had to force herself not to flinch. "Ambassador Delarion," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "It's an honor to finally see you." Vina stared at the screen. The man before her wore the same serious expression as his file photo, but his eyes, they weren't predatory at all. They were warm, almost shy. And behind him, she could see what was unmistakably a collection of potted plants. "Are those earth flowers?" she found herself asking, temporarily forgetting her prepared formal greeting. His face transformed with enthusiasm. "Yes. I've been researching celestial flora, trying to create optimal growing conditions for some of your native species. I thought, well, I hoped it might help you feel more at home here." Vina's markings betrayed her surprise with a burst of bright color. This was not the conversation she had expected to have with a hardened military officer. "Lieutenant Kane." "Please, call me Thomas," he interrupted, then looked embarrassed. "Unless that's too informal for celestial customs." "Thomas," she tried the name carefully. "The flowers are thoughtful." "Thank you." They talked for nearly an hour, mostly about plants. He knew an surprising amount about celestial photosynthetic evolution, and his questions about her people's connection to their triple suns were genuine and insightful. Not once did he mention combat or military matters. As the call ended, Vina sat in her quarters, her markings pulsing with confusion. Everything she had believed about humans, about Thomas Kane in particular, was being challenged. She walked to her viewport and gazed at the blue-green planet growing larger in the distance. Perhaps, she thought, there was more to these humans than their capacity for violence. Perhaps, like the smoothie she had learned to enjoy, they would surprise her with unexpected sweetness. The thought made her markings glow just a little brighter as Earth grew larger in her view, looking less like a warrior's stronghold and more like a world of possibilities. The landing pad at the International Diplomatic Center hummed with activity as the stellar bridge made its final descent. Vina stood in the ship's preparation chamber, adjusting her formal robes for the 12th time. Her markings, despite her best efforts, flickered between anxiety and anticipation. "Ready, Ambassador?" Captain Walsh asked, her uniform pristine for the ceremonial disembarkation. Vina nodded, not trusting her voice. The past week's video conversations with Thomas had eased some of her fears, but meeting in person was entirely different. What if her presence triggered some dormant aggressive instinct? What if? The ship's doors opened, and Earth's sunlight streamed in. Vina blinked, adjusting to the singular sun's intensity. As her vision cleared, she saw the welcoming committee waiting below. In the center stood Thomas Kane, looking considerably more nervous than his military file photo suggested. Following diplomatic protocol, Vina descended the ramp with measured steps. The Earth gravity felt strange, heavier than she was used to, but she maintained her composure. As she approached Thomas, she noticed his hands were clasped behind his back, a posture she recognized from her cultural training as one of formal respect. "Ambassador Delarion," he said softly, then smiled. The expression transformed his face just as it had during their video calls. "Welcome to Earth." "Lieutenant Kane," she responded, her voice steadier than she felt. "Thank you for your welcome." A small object caught her eye, a green leaf stuck to his sleeve. It seemed out of place on his immaculate uniform, and without thinking, she gestured toward it. "You have." Thomas looked down and flushed slightly. "Oh. Sorry, I was in the greenhouse this morning, making sure everything was ready." He brushed the leaf away, then added quickly, "I hope you'll visit the gardens soon." Some of the Celestian specimens are already adapting well. The formal atmosphere cracked slightly as several officials smiled. Vina's markings brightened with amusement despite herself. This was not how she had imagined their first meeting would go. The official reception passed in a blur of introductions and ceremonial speeches. Vina found herself constantly aware of Thomas's presence beside her, but not in the fearful way she had anticipated. Instead, she noticed how he subtly shifted his position whenever someone moved too close to her, maintaining a comfortable buffer zone. He had clearly studied Celestian personal space preferences. Later, as the formal proceedings ended, Thomas offered to show her to her quarters. They walked through corridors that reminded her of the Stellar Bridge, but these were softened by the presence of plants and natural light from large windows. "I hope you don't mind," Thomas said as they walked, "but I took the liberty of adjusting the quarters' lighting to match Celestian spectrums. And there's a small garden terrace." He opened the door to reveal a space that took Vina's breath away. The room was bathed in light that perfectly mimicked her homeworld's triple suns, achieved through some clever arrangement of spectrum-adjusted panels. The promised terrace hosted an array of plants, some from Earth and others unmistakably Celestian. "You did all this?" Her markings pulsed with emotion she couldn't quite contain. Thomas rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she now knew indicated embarrassment. "I had help from the botanical team. And I've been studying Celestian environmental preferences. I wanted you to feel, well, not quite so far from home." Vina moved to examine a familiar purple-leafed plant from her homeworld. "How did you get these to grow under a single sun?" "That's actually an interesting challenge we solved," Thomas said, his earlier nervousness falling away as he explained the specialized light filters and nutrient adjustments they'd developed. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Vina found herself asking questions about Earth plants as well. They spent the next hour discussing botanical differences between their worlds. At one point, Thomas reached past her to adjust a plant's position, and Vina realized she hadn't flinched at his proximity. When had she stopped seeing him as a potential threat? A chime interrupted their conversation, a reminder of the evening's diplomatic dinner. Thomas straightened, formal posture returning. "I should let you rest and prepare," he said. "But perhaps, would you like to visit the main greenhouse tomorrow? There's something special I'd like to show you." Vina's markings brightened before she could control them. "I would like that very much." As Thomas left, Vina caught her reflection in the window. Her markings were glowing in a pattern she hadn't seen in weeks, one of genuine pleasure. The human she had feared meeting was nothing like the warrior she had imagined. Instead, she had found someone who spoke the language of growing things, who understood the importance of light and nurturing. Looking out at the Earth sunset painting the sky in colors so different from her homeworlds, Vina thought about her earlier fears. She had expected to meet a savage and found instead a gardener. She had braced for aggression and found consideration. The irony made her markings pulse with amusement. Tomorrow, she would see his greenhouse. Tomorrow, she would learn more about this human who defied all her preconceptions. And for the first time since receiving her diplomatic assignment, Vina found herself looking forward to tomorrow with anticipation rather than dread. The next few weeks brought a cascade of revelations about humans that no amount of research could have prepared Vina for. Every day spent in Thomas's company challenged another preconception, until she began to wonder how her people's view of humans had become so distorted. The greenhouse became their sanctuary. Thomas had created a remarkable fusion of Earth and Celestian environments, complete with specialized climate zones. It was here, among the thriving plants, that Vina first saw him truly relaxed. "Each species has its own rhythm," he explained one morning, carefully tending to a delicate Celestian crystal flower. "You have to learn their language, when they need light, water, or just some quiet company." Vina watched his large hands perform surprisingly delicate work. The same hands that her research said could wield weapons now gently supported fragile stems and carefully measured nutrients. "You speak of them as if they're people," she observed. Everything alive deserves respect, he replied, his focus on the plant unwavering. That's something both our species understand, isn't it? Before she could respond, alarms blared through the complex. Vina's markings flashed with panic. Was this the violence she had originally feared? But Thomas's reaction surprised her. Instead of rushing to weapons, he quickly moved to secure the more delicate plants against whatever emergency might be coming. Stay here, he said calmly. The greenhouse is one of the safest places in the complex. I'll find out what's happening. He returned minutes later to report that a technical malfunction had triggered the environmental alerts. The way he had prioritized protecting life, even plant life, over rushing to battle touched something deep in Vina's understanding. As days passed, she found herself integrated into more aspects of human life. Thomas introduced her to what he called comfort food, dishes meant to soothe and please rather than simply provide nutrition. He showed her earth music, and though the rhythms were strange to her, she found herself moved by the emotions they conveyed. One evening, they attended a cultural exhibition where human children performed a dance recital. Vina watched in amazement as the small humans moved with joy and enthusiasm, their parents radiating pride and love. I thought all human physical movements were combat-based, she admitted to Thomas afterward. He laughed softly. We do love to move, but not just for fighting. Dance, sports, play, they're all ways we express ourselves physically. Even our combat training is often more about discipline and personal growth than actual fighting. A diplomatic reception later that week proved particularly enlightening. Vina observed human social interactions with new eyes, noting how they used touch to convey comfort, joy, and friendship. Their emotional displays, which she had once found alarming, now fascinated her. Your species feels everything so intensely, she said to Thomas as they walked through the garden after the reception. You laugh, cry, argue, and reconcile, sometimes all within the same hour. Does that frighten you? He asked, his voice carrying a note of concern. Vina considered the question seriously. It did once. Now I think I understand better. Your emotions aren't a sign of savagery, they're part of your strength. You feel deeply, but you also choose how to act on those feelings. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the greenhouse. They rushed to find that a water main had burst, threatening some of the more sensitive plants. Without hesitation, Thomas organized the nearby staff into an efficient rescue operation. Vina watched as humans worked together, getting soaked but saving every plant they could reach. In the aftermath, as they surveyed the minimal damage, Vina noticed Thomas's uniform was drenched and muddy. In that moment, she saw him clearly, not as the fearsome warrior she had once imagined, nor as just the gentle gardener she had come to know, but as something more complex, a human, capable of both strength and tenderness, discipline and spontaneity, practical action and deep feeling. You're glowing again, he noted, smiling despite his sodden state. Vina didn't try to control her markings' luminescence. I'm learning that there are many kinds of strength, she said. My people think of humans as warriors because of your capacity for violence. But we never understood that the same passion that can drive you to fight also drives you to create, to nurture, to love. Thomas's expression softened. And what do you think of humans now? I think, she said carefully, her markings pulsing with a new pattern she wasn't quite ready to name, that there is much more for me to learn. And that I'm grateful to be learning it with you. That night, in her quarters, Vina composed a long message to the Celestian Council. It was time, she decided, to help her people understand the truth about humans, not as the savages they feared, but as the complex, passionate, caring beings she was coming to know. As she wrote, her markings glowed with increasing confidence, painting the room with patterns that spoke of hope, understanding, and something more personal she wasn't quite ready to acknowledge. 3 months after her arrival on Earth, Vina stood before the joint Earth-Celestian Council, her markings radiating a calm confidence that would have been unthinkable when she first received her diplomatic assignment. Thomas stood beside her, their shared proposal for expanding the cultural exchange program displayed behind them. The Greenhouse Project has demonstrated that our species can do more than coexist, Vina explained to the assembled officials. We can create something new together, something that benefits both worlds. The evidence was compelling. The hybrid garden they had developed was producing remarkable results. Earth plants enhanced by Celestian light processing techniques, Celestian species strengthened by Earth's robust genetic diversity. But Vina knew she was also proof of another kind of successful integration. Her own transformation had not gone unnoticed. Other Celestians commented on her new mannerisms, the way she sometimes gestured while speaking, her occasional use of human expressions, the unprecedented patterns that appeared in her markings when Thomas was near. Some viewed these changes with concern, seeing them as signs of human influence corrupting their ways. Ambassador Delarion, one of the Celestian Council members, spoke, his own markings showing disapproval. Your report suggests a level of integration that many find disturbing. There are concerns that prolonged exposure to human emotionality might be affecting your judgment. Vina felt Thomas tense beside her, but before he could speak, she stepped forward. Her markings blazed with a brilliance that caught everyone's attention. My judgment has not been compromised, it has been enhanced. I came to Earth believing humans were savages barely containing their violent nature. I was wrong. Their capacity for emotion, which we once feared, is the source of their greatest strengths, their creativity, their resilience, their ability to forge connections across any divide. She turned to look at Thomas, no longer hiding the patterns of affection that illuminated her skin. Yes, humans feel deeply. They love fiercely, grieve profoundly, and celebrate joyously. But they also choose, every day, how to channel those emotions. They choose to create rather than destroy, to protect rather than harm, to unite rather than divide. The Human Council members were nodding, and even some of the Celestian representatives showed markings of thoughtful consideration. Vina continued, her voice strong and clear. The diplomatic union program was designed to create bonds between our peoples. But true bonds cannot be forged from duty alone. They must grow from understanding, respect, and... She paused, then committed to the word, love. Thomas stepped forward then, his hand finding hers in a gesture that caused murmurs among the Celestian Council members. When I was chosen for this program, he said, I promised to honor both our cultures. I've learned that Celestian ways value harmony, growth, and the patient nurturing of new life. He smiled at Vina. These are values I share, values that have shaped my own life's work. One of the Human Council members leaned forward. Are you suggesting that your diplomatic union has become real? Vina finished. What began as duty has grown into choice. We are not just representatives of our species anymore, we are two individuals who have found something extraordinary in each other. Her markings swirled with patterns of love and commitment, patterns she no longer tried to hide. Thomas's smile widened as he recognized their meaning, he had become quite adept at reading her luminescence. The council chambers erupted in discussion. Some voices were concerned, others excited by the implications. But Vina and Thomas stood calmly in the center of the storm, their proven success with the Greenhouse Project lending weight to their words about integration and harmony. Finally, the head of the Earth delegation spoke. Your work with the Hybrid Garden Project has shown remarkable results. If your personal integration has been equally successful, perhaps it's time to expand the program? Hours later, after the council had finally approved their proposals, Vina and Thomas returned to their greenhouse. The setting sun painted the glass walls in colors that reminded her of home, while Earth's moonlight created shadows she had grown to love. Do you remember how terrified you were when you first arrived? Thomas asked softly, carefully tending to a night-blooming earth orchid that had been successfully crossed with a Celestian luminescent flower. Vina's markings rippled with amusement. I was convinced you would be a savage warrior who would destroy everything delicate in his path. She touched a nearby plant, its leaves shimmering with a combination of Earth chlorophyll and celestian light processing cells. Instead, I found someone who helps delicate things flourish. Thomas gently touched one of her glowing markings, a gesture that once would have made her recoil in fear but now filled her with warmth. And I found someone who taught me that strength can look like starlight. Above them, the hybrid flowers began to glow in the darkness, their light neither entirely earth nor entirely celestian, but something new and beautiful. Like their love, unexpected, unprecedented, and all the more precious for having grown from fear into understanding, from duty into choice. Venus' markings painted the greenhouse in patterns of joy as Thomas drew her close. She had come to Earth expecting to find a savage and found instead her perfect match. As their lips met in a kiss that bridged two worlds, the flowers around them pulsed with borrowed light, a symbol of what could happen when fear gave way to love, when different worlds chose to grow together rather than apart.